Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 199. What a number that is. The Board Game Barrage podcast. I am your host, the Orange Tank, and with me, as always, are the green and red tanks, Mark and Kellen. How are you both doing?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you warming up my hosting of the big 200 coming up next week. So
You are welcome.
you're the warm-up act. And
I just come on stage, I do my horribly prepared 30-second bits, and then stumble off stage, get the crowd warmed up.
Yeah, but set a low bar.
Exactly. Not too. We want it to be funny, but not too funny. Get them a little bit warm. They were like, "Oh, is this kind of going to be the caliber of the performance?" But they were like, "Oh, wait, no, there it is." Yeah,
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah, one episode away from 200. That is wild. But you know what's more wild than that is episode 200 is going to be featuring your voices. And you can reach out to us at boardgamebarrage.com/voicemail if you want to reflect on your favorite memories of the past 200 episodes of Board Game Barrage, and we will be incorporating your voicemail into the episode and responding and reacting to it. And specifically, if you have any very particular moments that stand out from the episodes, please, after your message, give us the episode number and the timestamp, and we'll do our best to track it down and include it on the show. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about something that, like our very own podcast, goes back a long, long time. And they're these very archaic labels that we've ascribed to a lot of board games, Eurogame and Ameritrash. We're going to be sort of talking a little bit about where that comes from, what we think it means, and whether we think they ought to stick around. But before we do that, let's talk about the games that we've been playing. And this week, we're going to be talking about Hostage Negotiator, Juicy Fruits, Sleeping Gods, and Witchstone.
Witchstone?
Witchstone.
What do you mean?
this stone?
Witchstone.
Leon, what was the word that you didn't know how to pronounce?
Produce.
Yeah. Abua?
A boy.
A boy?
A boy.
Mark, what word do you think he's saying? A boy.
A boy.
A boy.
Abide?
Boy?
I don't know.
Yeah, it is hard to say.
Boy.
Wait, what?
He is saying the word buoy,
Oh, buoy. Okay.
like a Neelan would say it.
Neelan, say the word. I'm going to spell it, and I want to hear how you say it. Debut.
Debut.
Okay. Interesting. Because
Wait, you've heard someone pronounce it differently?
I have been watching. This is totally outside the range of this episode, but I've been
Australian
watching
Survivor.
close. I've been watching a Amazon show about the All Blacks,
Okay.
and there's like tracking them during a season. And a guy was talking about his debut, and he kept calling it his debut.
His debut. Interesting.
My first match with the All Blacks, I was really excited about my debut.
That's
And he kept
was
calling
there
it debut.
repeated by other players or just himself?
I think there was one other. I think the coach or something may have called it a debut also.
Interesting. So New Zealand is fascinating because it's like the New Zealand accent actually to my ear sounds the closest to the South African accent a lot of the time.
Right.
But there are some words that are so twisted like that I believe it, but that I've not heard that before ever. No.
Are you sure it's not just a cutesy way to do it? You know? Like we talk about innovation as inno, and they're just being cheeky.
Debut.
These
Debut.
these big rugby players are known for their
Cuteness.
cheekiness. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, what do you mean? It could be.
It could be. It could be.
I love the idea of the cute version of the haka and how that would look.
Oh.
That'd be amazing. Okay, let's get back to it. Mark, kick us off with Hostage Negotiator.
So, in my quest to, well, I guess my forced quest to play more solo games now that I'm all by myself here in Vegas, I picked up Hostage Negotiator. In Hostage Negotiator, you play the titular role of the Hostage Negotiator. I'll start right there when talking about one of the things I liked about the game, which is the variability available if you really get into it. There are 3 hostage takers that come in the base box, but there
They're
are
like
a ton
at a
more.
bank, at a terrorist cell.
There's at a bank.
Okay.
There is at a hospital. I don't know what the third one is.
Are there hostages in hospital scenarios?
Yeah,
that
I'll
happens?
get more into that. That's coming. That's coming.
Okay.
But if you're into it, if you like it, there are a ton more expansions if you decide this game is your thing.
Exotic locations with which people could be kidnapped.
Maybe even New Zealand. Maybe one of the hostage abductors is all black.
Mm-hmm.
Has that expansion debuted yet?
Nice way to circle back around. Speaking of expansions, one thing as a quick side note, the expansions come in like little blister packs that you get baseball cards in. I don't know if Pokemon cards come in that. It's not my world, but like baseball cards used to come in these blister packs, and like the expansions come in blister packs. And I think that's really a really cool way to have expansions packaged. Anyway, to start the game, you select the hostage taker you want to play against, and they each have like a backstory. And this is one of the potential stumbling blocks for some people. I played against 2 that came in the base game. The first is like sort of the standard run-of-the-mill action movie hostage taker, like, guy just out for money or whatever. The second one was a guy who was taking hostages because he was desperate for his kid to have an operation. And that's the one that was in the hospital.
Oh, like the movie John Q with Denzel Washington?
Exactly. So
that's a bona fide classic.
I can see how some might find that like unnecessarily heavy for a game that's otherwise pretty light and frivolous. That said, I think that the flavor text helped sort of sell the experience because, I read about it and they're like, okay, this has got the person I'm up against. Anyway, so you win the game by saving at least more than half of the hostages. Don't have to get them all. Low bar here. Just save at least more than half of them. And then either apprehending or neutralizing, killing the hostage taker. You can apprehend them, but you can also kill them. The way you lose is if more than half the hostages die, if the hostage taker gets away, or if you run out of time. Those are the 3 loss conditions. The way this works mechanically is that you start with a hand of cards, and you have a tableau of cards in front of you that you can buy. The first thing you do each round is you can play as many of the cards that you have in your hand as you want. So you start with a hand of cards, you play as many as you want. You play them in one of a couple ways. You can either burn one to get a conversation point, which is the currency of the game. And as another aside, while it's sort of like silly to like have the currency called conversation points, I think it's like a great thematic touch. It's like the idea that the currency that you have to spend to get ahead with the abductor is the conversation that you're able to have with them. So it's cool. Like the thing that you're using to get ahead, to get yourself better in the game, the currency is like the way you're talking to them. I think it's just a nice sort of touch.
They say, take one step closer and I'll kill them. And then you say, no, sir, have 5 CP. And then they say,
no. Well, so I'll get more into this later, but you're using the conversation points to buy cards, and the cards each have like a little text bubble of what you're saying. So, like, you got to talk to them.
I know where your grandma is sleeping.
Right, yeah. So you've played this game, I can tell, based on that. The other way you can use the cards, which is like sort of the main way to use the cards, is for the actions depicted on them, which represent you talking to the guy. So depending on the threat level, you roll a number of dice. So if the person's calm, they feel less threatened, the more dice you get to roll. So then you roll the dice. 2 of the faces, and they're 6-sided dice, 2 of the faces are successes, 3 of them are failures, and then 1 of them is a success only if you're willing to burn 2 of the cards you have in hand, which is like a valuable resource you have, because the cards are what you're using to sort of like do anything you want to do in the game. Depending on what you roll and what the card says, so the card will have, like, if you have 2 successes, it'll give you something really good, and if you have no successes, it'll do something bad. So the good and bad can vary. You can get more conversation points for a high success. You might even be able to save hostages. You might even have hostages go from the in jeopardy pile to the saved pile, which again is one of the things you need to do. Or if you fail, you might raise the threat level, which will give you less dice. And if the threat level goes too high, he starts killing hostages. You might lose conversation points, or you might potentially get hung up on, and that ends that phase of the round. So that's one thing that you're fighting against, because you keep playing cards out of your hand until you either run out, you choose to stop playing cards out of your hand, or the abductor decides they don't want to talk to you because you failed. That's like the conceits. You've said something dumb, and now that ends that part of the round. The second phase is where you spend the conversation points you've accrued to buy better cards from the tableau. So there are cards that allow you to get potentially better things. I think one of the most expensive cards is like Take the Shot, where you are trying to take him out. So in order to even be able to get to that, you have to have a lot of conversation points to buy that card. The final phase, so after you buy the cards that you want, the final phase is where the bad guy acts and you flip over a card from this terror deck, which is also the timer of the game. So you flip the card over and bad stuff happens. And if you get to that phase and you need to flip a card over and the deck has been exhausted, you lose. That's again the timer of the game. So that's how the game works. First thing, and the biggest thing, is that if this game was longer, I think I would probably hate it. But for as quick as it is, which is about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I liked it. The biggest issue people are going to have, and that I had to some extent for sure, is the dice rolling. There's a lot of it, You're rolling dice basically after every card you play. And while you can definitely mitigate, and I think that with more plays, I'll have a better grasp on how to mitigate and, the way to approach the different situations. Sometimes you're just going to roll blanks because, again, half the die faces are blanks. And sometimes you're just going to roll them and you're just going to get messed up. That is going to be a deal breaker for people, and I totally get why that would be. That said, like a lot of other things that I've touched on in this game, even that works thematically. Like, the idea is that you're talking to somebody who's like desperate or unhinged and who knows how things are going to work out. So this is a situation where, again, if the game was longer, there would be nothing that you could paper over the cracks, and it would just be a game that would just be too luck based, and it just would not work. For what it is, for the thematic touches that are introduced to cover up the cracks, I think it works. I think the thematic touches and the shortness of the game paper over like the frustration you might get when you roll bad dice. And again, it's not a complete luck fest. There are certainly ways to mitigate it. But yeah, I think as a package, it works. For a 15-minute quick filler, it's fun. It's like a fun push your luck mitigation, dice rolling thing that I think works. I mean, for example, I would much rather play this than a standard roll and write. And I know a lot of roll and writes, the luck is almost like completely taken out. There's way, way more mitigation. But I liked it.
It's funny, the idea of even just the theme of like you said, just like this teetering on a knife's edge type idea thematically, and how well that lends itself to something like this. And that like press your luck as a genre is like, okay, could I bide my time and make this work, or do I just have to make the bold sudden like shot in the dark and hope it works? And like that just feels so perfect for this. I love that it works as well as you say it does.
Exactly. And like you get the situation where you have a bunch of cards in your hand and you're like, okay, I need to do this and then that, and I just need to make sure these work, but I'd like to build up things before that.
Yeah.
But especially for the cards that are low cost, there's a stack of cards that are zero cost, so you can buy all of them if you want. But those all have a fail, hang up on you sort of situation. And while you can mitigate, if you roll, again, just blanks, then you could have your round end right away and then have all those plans sort of like out the window. Mm-hmm. So that is Hostage Negotiator by Van Ryder Games, designed by AJ Porfirio.
So the first game I want to talk about really quickly is a game called Juicy Fruits by Capstone. And this is in their CG family line. So there's a game that is targeted at a family audience. And the premise of the game broadly is you are collecting fruit, which you then use to run businesses or make milkshakes,
It's a disparate sort of use
exactly.
of fruits. Okay.
Businesses and milkshakes. I mean, those are the two major things we utilize fruits for.
With
so,
food, yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
It makes sense. Mechanically, what you're doing is you have this main player board, which is a slide puzzle. So you have, imagine like a grid that is blocked at the edges by boats at the start of the game. And you have these collector baskets that each have a different picture of a fruit on them. So you have 5 of them. There's apples, oranges, bananas, and so on. And you move one of those pieces any number of spaces in a straight line, and that's how many of that fruit you collect. So it's a puzzle of moving your pieces around each other to set them up for longer and longer lines of collection in order to get more and more fruit. Because the better ice creams, the better milkshakes take more fruits. The better businesses, theoretically, costs more fruits. You also have contracts you can fulfill on these boats that are blocking the edges of your boards at the start of the game. The ones that give you more points cost more fruits, and then you can remove them from your board, so freeing up more space in your board. One of the fun things, which is quite clever about this, is as you're buying these businesses, some of them are going onto your board. So you're getting points for them, but you're blocking off sections of your board. So that's kind of the main trade-off.
It's not fun. It might be interesting. It's not fun because you're
as a
clogging
puzzle.
up
I thought
board.
it was clever,
Sure.
at least. Yeah, which is like, okay, can I afford to block off the section of my board? It's going to hurt my ability to get fruits, but I'm going to get points out of it. That is basically the whole gist of the game. The central board is a sort of a collection of businesses that you sort of randomly assign to different costs, and that is a kind of where, in my mind, the game starts to break down a little bit. Kellen, do you want to jump in before I come back to that?
I mean, I think the only thing I would say is that it has replaced New York Zoo as the worst Capstone game that I've ever played.
Wow, I don't even know where to start with that, because A, you're very wrong about New York Zoo. Damn it, I hate you. I hate when you do this to me, Kellen.
What do I
you're
do
not
to you?
wrong. It is the worst Capstone game.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Poke,
You tricked-
poke.
I don't think this is a well-designed game, ultimately speaking. I think that the central puzzle is fun, but the central board where you spend the fruits, you're randomly assigning these business tokens to them, and some of them are like, okay, 15 points, and we're going to put it in the first row arbitrarily where it costs the least, which just doesn't make any sense to me as something that Capstone would put out. You kind of feel like there would be a better system for determining value of input versus output. It just feels all a little bit too arbitrary in terms of what you are spending fruits on and what you benefit.
Well, not only that, you randomize where your fruit starts, so someone may just be able to get the thing on the third row before you by virtue of just starting the game. I think it's odd because it's clear they spent a lot in production of this game. Like, the fruit tokens are really, really cool. It looked really, really good on Instagram. The slide puzzle is fun, but everything else is like, why is this the way it is? But
yeah,
I was pretty surprised.
This, I think, was disappointing. I had a pretty, I wouldn't say strong, but like when I played this at Gen Con as a 2-player, it kind of felt like, oh, this is cute and fun. But that was very different from our experience of playing a 3-player, where it took almost as long to set up as it did to play. And it was just over very quickly, felt very arbitrary. I got more points than anyone by a lot for reasons that didn't really seem fair, and that was it. It was a fun system to interact with in terms of the slide puzzle, but the way that you spend the fruits just doesn't feel like it makes any sense.
I concur with everything Neelan said, except the sentence where he said he scored more points than me.
Factually true.
You said that you enjoyed it on that first test play at 2 players and not so much at 3, or not at all at 3.
Yeah.
Could that be a function of player count?
Absolutely. And I think this is worth talking about. It was where I do think if you are like literally head to head with someone, it kind of smooths out some of the chaos of multiplayer games where things will just be gone before you, because it becomes a little bit more, okay, what's the thing that this player wants? You can look at their board and see what they have and be like, okay, I'll take that before they need to. Played like that, which is giving it way more credit than it deserves, it helps it a little bit. But it's just not the game for that. Like, it's too light. I think the thing that disappointed by me the most is that in the realm of family games, this is not it, you know? Like, it's not enough to say, oh, it's just a family game. There are better light family games. That is Juicy Fruits by Capstone Games. The second game I want to talk about is Sleeping Gods by Red Raven Games and Ryan Lockett. This is a narrative cooperative adventure game where you are all crew members on a ship that starts on one section of a map, which is represented by this beautiful, like, spiral-bound book. So you open it up to a specific page. You now have a map laid out that is divided into sections with numbers representing locations on it. On your turn, you will choose cooperatively, let's head in this direction. You will take travel actions where you will move the ship to new locations. You'll say, okay, I want to explore what looks like an inviting little hut on this beautifully illustrated map. You turn to that page in the adventure book and you read a paragraph of text that explains what's going on at that location. Get some choices, choose your own adventure style, and that could lead to having to utilize resources, having to utilize stuff you discovered at other locations, potentially combat in a combat system, which I think is quite cool, which I'll get back to in a little bit. But largely, it is about open world exploring, picking up little seeds of narrative and utilizing them in other parts of the world. It's a game of discovery and just kind of storytelling adventure. It reminds me a lot of a video game series called Sunless Seas and Sunless Skies, where it just has that feel like it's just a chill game where you're roaming around. There's not a huge amount of threat until you get into combat situations, but you're kind of just discussing with each other, okay, this looks like the direction we need to head for this quest, because you pick up a card from one location that will say, okay, you're looking for this specific location. It's to the east. And then you look at your map and you sort of scroll through the map book and you find this location that kind of looks like it might visually represent where you think you're going, and you explore off in that direction. Random events happens, you're doing skill checks involving effectively rolling dice, but really flipping cards from a deck. You're acquiring new abilities for your crew, new items, new weapons, that sort of thing. That's kind of the gist of this. It's very reminiscent of another game I spoke about previously in the podcast called Tainted Grail, where the joy of this could just be the book. Like, it reminds me of a lot of games I played when I was younger. There's not necessarily choose your own adventure, but role-playing game books, and kind of just that wanting to turn the page and go through it and find where every story thread is going to lead. Except it's just so expansive. The world just feels massive. Like in the 2 few hour games I've played of this, we've explored a couple of pages of this map book. It just feels like there's a lot that you could discover in any given campaign. And cleverly, a campaign is designed to last a very limited amount of time, where you could only explore a portion of the world. So it's not like something like a Gloomhaven where you're investigating all of the content in one campaign. The idea is you will get to an endpoint, have to restart and be like, okay, let's explore an entirely different section of the map with the previous knowledge that we have about this world and this story, and discover something different. I think it's just a really clever conceit that's actually done really well. The writing is solid for this sort of light storytelling game. The art is beautiful and very inviting. And the combat system is actually pretty cool. I kind of dig into this very quickly. Anytime you get into a combat with monsters, you lay out their monster cards, which are typically predetermined, and they have this grid of symbols where whenever you do successful attacks against them, depending on how much damage you're doing, it's sort of like a puzzle of placing markers in specific patterns on their combined grids in order to cover up symbols which are either going to negate damage they're doing, negate negative effects they're dealing at the end of the round, or kill those specific monsters. So there's just like this visual puzzle to it that is very specific to each encounter. And I thought that was like such a clever way to do combat that didn't feel like very taxing. It has the sort of die rolling nature of combat, which is to say you're rolling to hit, you're seeing how much damage you do, that sort of thing. But the way that you resolve the damage just felt really, really novel. I dug this. We've had more than a few combat encounters that felt really, really close to the edge, not by virtue of just like bad rolls, but just because of bad planning. And kind of that constant payoff of finding a quest and finding the way to complete it and being rewarded for your time and your inclination of where to go and how to complete the quest. That loop is just familiar to anyone that plays open world role-playing computer games, and it's very coolly reproduced in something like this.
Looking at the full setup here, looks quite like a lot happening. Is setup and teardown between these sessions easy?
No, it's definitely in the Gloomhaven realm of there's just going to be a lot of time that is spent setting up and tearing down. The one thing that the game does really cleverly, and it doesn't do this quite as cleverly as Tainted Grail, but the saving system, it's quite a mechanical thing that's laid out in the book of like, okay, take everything from this crew member, put it into this bag. Take everything from this crew member, put it into this bag. Record precisely this, and this information, and then next time you set it up, you're just going to take everything out and put it into a specific place. It's still a bit of a bear just by number of components purely, but they've thought about the most efficient way to like save and load your state with a minimum of time without you having to just write down a ton of information.
Couple questions, Neelan. Could you talk a little bit more about how this differs? I see what you're saying about the segmentation. It's not a legacy game because you're just checking out one part of the map and then another part of the map. But how does that work in terms of maybe like the storytelling? Like what is the conceit there that makes it like a segment to segment to segment sort of thing?
What do you mean by that? Do you mean like in the context of like campaign to campaign or from like session to session?
So my question, I guess, is does this game have like a number of campaigns? Like does this box have 5 campaigns in it? Is that what we're talking about?
No. So it's kind of, I hate to talk about this in the context of like video game analogies constantly, but it's sort of like a Skyrim, which is maybe the most people have played this in the context of video games that I can think of, where it's just one big open world. But like in that sort of game and in Sleeping Gods, I could be like, okay, I'm going to go west and spend hours exploring what's off to the west, play my whole campaign, live, die, come back. And then next time I bother to start, I'm like, oh, well, this time I'm going east and I'm going to see what's that way. It's just a big world that has so much content in it and so many little stories that sort of tell the story of the larger world. But where you choose to go and what parts of it you choose to explore are entirely up to you. Yeah, there is no like central through line story to it, at least as far as I can tell. Maybe there will be some larger arc to it creeping in at the edges, but that hasn't seemed important to me so far. Like, I'm getting enough out of just the smaller stories that it doesn't really need it.
So as somebody who has not played the entire Gloomhaven campaign, which you have, my understanding with Gloomhaven is, you know, you're going on 30, 40 missions, whatever, but there is a general through line that connects it all. And you're nodding your head, so that seems to be accurate, and that's just the way I've always envisioned it. So the way I'm now envisioning Sleeping Gods, based on what you're saying, is that take that idea of Gloomhaven with like 50 missions on a single thread and just make each mission disparate and its own thing, and you can just go wherever you want and deal with whatever missions you happen to find on that path?
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of like if you took Gloomhaven. You know how like in Gloomhaven you'd had like, okay, let's go explore this. We found a map that leads to a thing that's like independent from the main story.
Right.
It's like that if the whole game was just side quests.
Yeah.
You took out the main story. That's pretty much it.
Right.
Yeah. It is side quests, the board game, I think is actually maybe the most apt description for it. Yeah.
Gotcha. And the other thing is you've played this at 2?
I played
players?
this at 3 and I played it at 2, but all you're doing is splitting responsibility for specific crew members. Like, you're typically making all of those decisions together. It doesn't change drastically by player count. It seems like something that would be just as strong solo, 2-player, 3-player. It didn't really seem like at any player count you would be any less involved in it.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So downtime is not bad, because I'm reading that it's bad.
I guess it's bad in the context of like, I want to be doing the things on my turn. I think you're probably looking for a different game if that's really is an issue with it. Like, I found that on other people's turns, I was as involved. It's that sort of co-op, that makes sense, where it's a little bit more like, oh, well, do we want to go in this direction? Maybe we should do this. When it comes to combat, every player is evolved pretty much equally. But yeah, the actual person that is doing the actions on a turn just felt kind of almost arbitrary to me. Not to a fault, just it didn't strike me as something that was like, oh, that's a bummer. I want it to be my turn now.
I'd be willing to make a bet that you never play this 5 times.
I think that's absolutely
by a lot
false.
of money.
I think that's absolutely false.
Or that you will dislike it by the time you get to 5. It sounds like a video game that's more annoying than just playing the video game on your own.
I could very much see a scenario where I finish a campaign of this and have less passionate interest to start another campaign of it. Like, my estimate based on our current, because there's a very specific clock on the campaign, I think it would take maybe 4 or 5 more sessions for us to finish that campaign. And that would be, I think, about 15 to 20 hours of gameplay. I could very much see that I would get to the end of that and be like, you know what, I'm good. I don't need to fire up another campaign of that. That would still be money well spent, in my opinion.
Not if you dislike it by that point.
No, absolutely. I don't anticipate
Which is what
that
I'm
happening.
betting.
I will absolutely follow up on that be the case. So I have a recurring plan to play this with my friend, and we will see how that progresses. But that is definitely not how I feel right now. But you have to want a game that is more storytelling oriented than one that is mechanics oriented.
Like Tales of Arabian Nights, but with annoying systems grafted on top of it.
I can't speak to that. I've not played Tales of Arabian Nights, but I think it's different because it's like, even in the context of other Locket games, right? It's like Above and Below is a game I don't love much at all, but because it's a single session game where it tries to convince you the story is important, but you're also doing other mechanical things. I don't think that works for me as well as the story is what's important here, but there are also mechanical concerns, which is closer to like what Tainted Grail does and why that works for me. I get what you're saying, Kellen. I know that there will definitely be people that will play this and be like, I don't get it at all, but it does work for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. I think it's very, very clear that it would not work for me.
Yeah, no, I would say that without question. That is Sleeping Gods by Red Raven Games. Kellen, tell us about Witchstone.
So when we heard that Reiner Knizia had a new board game that was in some part based on Ingenious, one of my top 50 board games of all time, we were very excited to get our hands on it. Neil and Christina and I had the opportunity to sit down this weekend and play Witchstone. Witchstone is a game that I'm not going to be able to explain all the things in the game because there are too many things in the game, but in small part, there is a main board where you are doing light area control and route building, and then everyone has a sideboard where they are playing a one-player game of Ingenious by themselves, which is a little tile-laying symbol matching game. And basically, your turn in a game of Witchstone is you will play a tile to your little board, and the more icons that you match, the more actions that you unlock to do all around the game board. So there are 6 actions. And if you lay down a piece that connects a pentagram to a group of 2 other pentagrams, you've just unlocked 3 pentagram actions for your turn, which is awesome. There are route building actions that allow you to add to the main board. There are witch actions, which allow you to control the areas on the main board and stake your claim. There are pentagram actions, which is a circle track. There are magic wand actions, which is a straight track. There are crystal actions, which allow you to move crystals on your sideboard. And then there are scroll actions, which give you cards. The game has a very interesting arc where at the beginning of the game, you're really doing 2 energy actions and 1 witch action. And then by the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th turn, you're doing 7 witch actions and 4 magic wand actions, and you're really flying around these tracks and unlocking bonuses and scoring points. This game has been compared to a Feld game, and I think that is super, 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 super apt. Everything that you do in this game scores you some measure of points. Whether you're completing routes, you're getting points. Whether you're standing up witches, you're getting points. You're crossing certain tracks on the circle track, you're getting points. You cross certain tracks on the magic wand track, you're getting points. Blah, 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 blah. Every card you pick up gets you points, whether you use it or don't use it. Points, 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 points for everything. It is lovely. It is beautiful. I think that I knew I was in for trouble when the game gave me a reference card that said, if you ever get lost at how many actions you have of something, just use this. And you had to mark 0 to 10. So literally, you could have 9 pentagram actions that you do, and then you do your 3 crystal actions. Now, on top of that, you are unlocking bonus actions. So every so often on the pentagram track, you unlock a new bonus action, but you have to do that bonus action before you finish your 7 pentagram actions and before you start the other half of your tiles actions. It is an exceedingly beautiful game. There are things that I really like about Witchstone. There are a lot of things I do not like about Witchstone. I do not want to play Witchstone again. I think I gave it to Neelan. I think one of the highlights really is that feeling of putting together a beautiful, there's like 4 pentagrams in a row, and you're like, I'm the king of the pentagrams. And then you put down the 5th one, and you're like, boom, 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 and you go around the entire track, and Christina hasn't even gone on the pentagram yet, and you're like, ha, 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 ha. But then one of the things I don't like is that you realize, oh, wait a minute, I only have 5 pentagram tiles in my entire amount of tiles that I have for the whole game, meaning the game is really gating you. I thought, oh, I'm going to be the pentagram kid, and, on turn 11, I'm going to unlock 12 of these babies, and no one's going to know what's coming. No, the game actually, Reiner uses his degree here to mathematically not allow you from doing what you actually think would be fun. Everyone was scoring points in a bunch of disparate ways, and the game ended, and I believe we were all within 6 or 7 points of each other. And it's just like, oh, did you forget I got 2 points for standing up that witch, and then I got 2 points for the tile, and then at the end of the game, I also get 2 points for that. Oh, okay. Oh, 1 point. It's just inane after a certain point, though it is beautiful. It is beautiful, and it is fun. I had a good time, but I just think the game is tricking you more than the game is fun, because your ability to interact with each other is extremely limited. You can interact with each other on this magic wand track where you get double certain bonuses if you get there first. But then it's also a scoring track, so getting there last gets you more points in different ways because you have a more established board presence. Similar to the pentagram track, the faster you get to squares, the more points that you're getting. Similar to the witch track, which is that you want to stand up spaces first of all. Similar to the route building, where you want to be the one building the routes first. Everything that you do is pretty damn good in a game of Witchstone. Neelan, what did you think of Witchstone?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. Everything that you're doing is fun, and every little mini game has not a competitive nature in terms of interaction, but just this feeling of oh, I want to be a part of this. I want to be the person that's furthest ahead on the one track. I want to get my energy roots out onto the central board. I want to get witches up before other people do. But it is just this feeling that, like you said, that mathematically everything kind of amounts to the same thing. And I know that there has to be some bending to the truth of how much that could be so, because if you play a very, very bad game of solo Ingenious on your board, right, you could be doing 1 action every turn, theoretically, and that would be bad. But that means that the whole game is how well you do the Ingenious puzzle. It kind of felt like if you were competent enough to be stringing together some high action scoring combinations, which we kind of all were, you'll be within a similar range of each other as long as you're not doing anything silly or out of order, which is actually exactly how we ended up. We all ended up within 10 points of each other at a very specific chunk of the scoreboard. And the question I had immediately is like, what does a high scoring game of Witchstone look like? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I suspect it's not 50 points more than what we were doing, you know, because there is such a severe constraint on how many actions you can take of any given type.
I think it's especially offensive to me to call this like related to Ingenious, where you have sort of the tile laying, but you don't have any semblance of like you only score your lowest points. You know, in a game of Ingenious, it's really about blocking Nealon from getting blue, because if he gets behind in blue, you only score whatever your lowest total is. And so this is like saying, you know, oh yeah, the tile laying is based on Tigris and Euphrates, and it's just orthogonally adjacent squares, and like the game has nothing to do with that. And you're like, no. You know, it's like, it's a little bit more connected than that, but not much.
It's like, yeah, technically it's Ingenious, but the core of Ingenious to me, like emotionally, is like, oh, you're building up big chains and you're blocking other players from doing the chains. And like, none of that is in this, to be clear. Like, none of the good things about Ingenious are in this. And that, to be fair, like, I don't think the game is specifically saying it's Ingenious, the Eurogame, but like, that's what you want when you sort of see, oh, this takes this system that Knizia did and expands it out into a bigger game. One thing that's worth saying is that, you know, this is a co-design game, so it's hard to know how much Knizia there is in this and how much of the other designer, Martino Chiachera, is in it, but it does feel a little bit like perhaps there is the core of something here that could be expanded into a game that's a little bit more bouncy, a little bit more interactive, but it ends up just feeling like it's been very Euroed out, which is a shame.
Yes. I think that core of being like, oh, I'm going to do 7 magic wand actions is really promising. And you're like, wow, this could really get wild. And then things don't get wild. And then you realize the pentagram is just a circle track. And there's like 3 other tracks on the board that are all being disguised in different ways.
I'm a little disappointed to hear this because like you guys said, I'm always excited about a Knizia, and the fact that it's co-design makes it interesting. But everything you're saying does make it feel like, as Nealon said, if you're playing it competently, you're all probably going to be in the same area. And that's sort of a bummer that there's not a chance apparently to really make really big plays or play it especially well. Or
I think that some of the hate drafting could come in how the scroll action works, which is end of game prophecy cards that you score increasing amounts of points for based on how much you achieve them. It's the only action in the game where rather than just getting more actions, you're just getting more choices of which scroll to buy. As in one scroll action, you just pick the card at the bottom of the tableau,
right,
where if you have 6 of them, you just get to choose what you want. I think in a 2-player, super focused, I'm looking at Nealon's board while he's looking at my board, there probably is some hate drafting of that, where you're like, oh, damn, I need that versus I need that. But it is also like contrasted by the fact that you only have 5 of your 15 tiles with which to choose from to put into your Ingenious pool, meaning you might have all of your scrolls in your opening tile draw, and you're probably going to be playing them closer to the beginning of the game than at the end of the game, when you might be able to like strategically make those decisions.
And am I right to sort of guess that this doesn't give you very many chances to pivot in your strategy midway through because you're building these big chains of something, and to pivot would mean you'd have to start over? Or am I misunderstanding?
Chain only has up to 5, right? Because, there are some bonuses that you can add stuff to your tableau with, but you kind of are making a chain and then making another chain somewhere else and just trying to get them around 5 if you can.
Yeah,
I see.
And you kind of can. One of the actions is moving off obstacles that you have on that board that get in the way at the beginning of the game. So it's not like smooth sailing, and then you're also connecting it to different edge pieces that have different symbols on them. So that's what I wanted to do, was make one huge chain. You know, it's like, I'm going to be that person, and like you actually just literally cannot do that because you don't have the draw for it.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that's my biggest disappointment. Is I kept asking myself, like, okay, in subsequent plays of this, what would I do differently? Would I focus more on this and focus more on this? But the reality is, in every game, you're kind of doing a lot of everything because of those limitations, right? It doesn't really feel like you can go hard into one area by design. So I just think every game of this will start to feel like you've largely done the same stuff because you've seen all 15 of your Ingenious tiles every game.
Right.
So just in a different order, probably.
That is Witchstone, one of the latest Reiner Knizia games. It's very beautiful, and I think people would like to try it. I think very, very Euro players would enjoy it, which is probably a good lead into our topic of what even is a Euro player.
Yeah, but before we do that, let's very quickly shout out the PAX Math Trade. We are running the official Math Trade at PAX Unplugged this year. And if you want to take part, there are a few more days which you can. So if you're going to be at PAX Unplugged on Friday night where the exchange will be happening, please take part in our Math Trade. If you're not familiar with what a Math Trade is, we will teach you about it. Come over to our Discord. There will be plenty of people who will clue you in. But you can join the trade at boardgamebarrage.com/PAX Trade. Or if you want to hang in our Math Trade channel and find out what this is all about, that's at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Let's get right into the feature topic this week. And this week we are talking about these old labels that have sort of followed board games around for who knows how long. Eurogame and Ameritrash games. The whole idea is that on one side of the world, we have these games that have been developed in Germany in the 80s and 90s that largely focus on low conflict. So you have games that are more about resource gathering and trading and very low interaction games, typically, or at least very low conflict-oriented games, which then starts to expand to other sections of Europe and starts to become popular, especially with Catan around the rest of the world. In contrast, there is this label that gets thrown around of Ameritrash, which are games that are like
I prefer Ameritrash. Elon, please.
Well, we'll get back to what we should be calling these games later. But yes, this is like one of the hot debates. Is Ameritrash a bad label? It's a little bit offensive. Sure. Ameritrash games were typically sort of typified by dice rolling, randomness, thematic, big moments. This idea that it was less important that the game be mechanically sound so much as just fun to play. And this sort of drives a lot of like the classic American games that we're very much familiar with. Stuff like Monopoly, stuff like The Game of Life, just things that we all grew up playing. So I think before we get into like where we think that these labels are still applicable in modern board gaming, very curious to get both of your takes and what you think about when we talk about Eurogames, because that's actually kind of surprising to see that people have very different ideas on what the label Euro even really means in board games. So Kellen, what were some like words or what are things you would associate with Eurogames?
Sepia tones. I'm actually only half joking. I'm not even joking.
No, I think that's fair.
Brown colored board games. No, Eurogames typically I would associate with victory points and not an ability to like get out of the game, like that everyone is in it. I would say that there is less focus on randomness, specifically as it relates to combat resolution. Well, or as it relates to like resolution of things. I think in a Eurogame there's a lot of like what goes into it might be random. Like the board setup is variable, but then what you choose to do with it is your own. And then even if it does have randomness in it, the mitigation of allowing you, like I'm thinking of like an Oracles of Delphi, where it's like you get your dice rolls, but then you can change them all around using other values. It's like when I think of genre TV shows, I think of Ameritrash games for whatever reason. Like it's Fantasy Flight Games, making Battlestar Galactica, Marvel. It's like all of that is thematic, and that is the opposite of a Eurogame.
That's actually really interesting because this is something that I hadn't thought about that much until I started looking into this, which is this idea that Eurogames have the designer focused, right? Like designer games gets thrown around a lot as like something that's more strongly associated with Eurogames, which I never really thought about specifically. But like the idea that like we talk about Knizia and Felt and Kvatil and like some of our favorite designers in the space, and they are more typically associated with the Eurogame genre. There's almost like an auteur type approach to them, like this almost like independent scene, which is not even strictly accurate, versus the big studios of the Ameritrash games, like the Fantasy Flight, the Games Workshop. It is interesting how like you can get like very distinct mechanical differences between the two, whereas what we're describing is almost something very different to that. It's almost like the way that these games are produced, whether they're produced by a big body in the terms of like a corporate company or versus just these like auteur designers.
I don't know. I think that there's, and I understand your point, but I think there's like arguments to be made that both sides have big companies and both sides have their own sort of auteurs. Like, I would say Eric Lang is one of the big designers. I think he is much more classified as an Ameritrash designer than a Euro designer. And I think, you've got companies like, well, Mayfair is no longer a thing, but, Lookout Games, which is Uwe's Rio Grande. These are like, they're another designer of Euro games. You've got like Eagle Griffin. Again, these are a lot of like dusty companies, for lack of a better term, but I would consider them Euro publishers, even, and this is where we get into the hybrid, but like Capstone is sort of like in that realm as well.
Lang has to be a hybrid, to be fair. I think
Sure.
the name you're looking for is Corey Konitska. I don't know how to say his name.
The Fantasy Flight designer.
Yeah, who made like Forbidden Stars as like a very clear, prolific Ameritrash designer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fair to say that there are like holdouts and exceptions on both sides. But like in my mind, it feels like, and also worth saying that at the very least, until very recently, this was kind of the core thesis around each of those two camps. And it's certainly not a perfect analogy, but it does feel like there is, at least up to a certain point in history, there is something to that idea.
Yeah.
Which brings us to this interesting point that starts to happen in the last 10 years, where you're seeing board games open up in a very big way to the world at large. Catan blows up and suddenly everyone around the world is playing it. And that gives more exposure to other publishers in other parts outside of their isolated regions. And you start to see more interesting designs start to happen as a result. Hybrid games start to become a thing. I personally always think about this as a roundabout like Kemet, and then Scythe is one of the big ones that blows up in a big way. But you can sort of trace this back to around about 2010, where you're just starting to see games that start to rely a little bit on both halves of these camps, where you have games that are flashy and thematic and sort of have big production values and look really cool and expensive on the table, but are maybe more deterministic in nature, aren't about throwing dice, have card-based combat in the case of something like Kemet or in the case of Scythe. And the era of the hybrid starts to become more and more prominent, where the lines get really, really blurry, and it's not as easy to categorize a game, maybe intentionally in the case of something like a Scythe, which is very much Eurogame, but with mechs. It's a very cool time, which is actually very closely correlated to when I joined the hobby, and you start to see like the streams start to cross a little bit more. What would you guys characterize as some of like the biggest turning point hybrids in this period?
Whenever I think about hybrid, it's one of the first games that pops to mind. And it's a game, frankly, I haven't even played, but Eclipse is always the one that I think about, where one of the subgenres of board games, of Ameritrash board games, is the 4X game. And Eclipse is the Euro answer to the 4X game. It seems to me like a pretty strong midpoint between the two camps.
And especially when you have such a strong proponent in one of those camps like Twilight Imperium, right? So you take Twilight Imperium and you start to ask yourself, okay, what does this look like if we have the miniature ships, if we have dice combat, but we start to creep in some Euro mechanics. We start to creep in very gated resource gathering around territory control and the way that you can acquire resources, but with some balance to how much you can acquire without tipping your scales in a specific way, which is a very Euro design element. This idea that you, like we were just talking about Witchstone, you can do something, but there's a cost to that. You can't do too much of that. You can't unbalance the game by over exploiting. That's like something that we start to see a lot more in Euro design specifically, that starts to creep into these games. So in a game that is big and flashy, suddenly you start to see the design constrain a little bit more, and to my mind get closer to something that I really like mechanically in the case of something like Eclipse.
Yeah, I think for me it's about when the combat systems and the sort of general game flow became non-dumb. And I say that with all the love in the world. Like I played like a Warhammer Underworlds, which is just clearly an Ameritrash thing with the lightest amount of Euro lay on top of it. And I'm just like, how could anyone like this? But then I look back at like Chaos in the Old World, which uses sort of like the stricter action point system that Cthulhu Wars has taken. And it's like all the fun and excess of those Ameritrash games, but with a core that is like feels balanced. I think about Blood Rage, where it's like a drafting game with dumb combat, but like the combat's not as dumb as you would think it is. It's like got elements of even Cosmic Encounter where you just reveal, but it's like non-dumb. It's not stupid. And I say that again with all the love in the world, as Cosmic Encounter is one of my favorite board games ever. The term hybrid doesn't mean anything anymore because all board games are hybrid. Yeah. Which I think is sort of some of the impetus for this discussion, where it's just like, what are we even talking about when we say, is it a Euro or is it Ameritrash? It's like, it gets old after a while.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. One of the things that really stuck out to me over the last couple of weeks was, I think it was on the most recent episode where I described Gloomhaven as Euro-y. And then I caught myself afterwards wondering what I meant by that even. And what I think I meant was that it's, you associate dungeon crawls with Ameritrash typically. Like, it's big, it's flashy, you roll a lot of dice. And that's only to some extent what Gloomhaven is. In fact, very deliberately, Gloomhaven gets rid of the dice. It makes everything in the game a little bit more strategic, for lack of a better word, where it's not just about rolling well against monsters. It's about careful planning and usage of your cards in a hand management sense. And like, in my mind, I just associate that more with Euro design, even though there's not really anything that I would point to as Gloomhaven and being like, oh, here's something that is typical of a Euro game. So it just does start to feel like the descriptors just get really muddied, where you get an idea for what someone means when they say something is Euro-y, but it's not really a descriptor anymore. It's just almost like that you have these two loose genres and you can broadly classify a game as somewhere on that Venn diagram, but to my mind, that kind of makes it less useful as a descriptor anymore. It's sort of like picking two arbitrary halves that you can split all games or movies or something into and say like, okay, which half does this thing fall into? Like, that's an interesting exercise, but is it useful to people? And I think that one of the reasons that we thought this was interesting as a topic is because that's our role, is to provide useful information to you. So I don't know, what do you guys think in terms of the future of how we use these two terms? Is it something we should change? Like, what is a more useful way around these descriptions?
I think they are useful still, but I don't know if they ever were extremely useful. Yeah. But if they were, I think that usefulness has certainly waned. But, for example, if I said in describing Gloomhaven as a Euro-y dungeon crawler, I think that does get to the flavor of it generally pretty quickly. So, like, I think your description of it being like, you're taking the circle and you're dividing it in half and you're saying it's either this side or that side, I think that's apt because there's so much hybridization. If you say something is Euro-y, you might be just saying, like, on this spectrum where we have a line right here in the middle, it's just one touch to the Euro side or one touch to the Ameritrash side. To call something Ameritrash or Euro-y, you're certainly not now putting into a box where you're just head down multiplayer solitaire on one side or dice rolling, everybody screaming, big plastic on the other side. There's a lot of gradient there. But I think to call a game a Euro or Ameritrash doesn't say anything. But I think in conjunction with other descriptors, I think there is some use there. Those terms have been used so much over the last couple of years that it is a shorthand that is shared. Everybody knows generally what you're talking about when you say Euro. Like, again, when I say Euro-y dungeon crawler, that is not enough to really get into what Gloomhaven is, but like, you start getting a sense of what it is. You know what I mean?
I think there are two big problems lurking in the wings. We can call them big plastic and interactivity. Big plastic is easier to break down, which is to say that everybody is using big plastic now. Kickstarter has knocked the door down, so when you say that a game is big plastic, it could mean anything, when it once maybe only meant one thing, because there was sort of the German style, the core, this wood, this power grid, So when you describe a game as having a ton of plastic, that means nothing. in terms of the Euro to Ameritrash divide, even though it feels like it means it's probably more Ameritrash than not. It means nothing. So that's big plastic. So that's an easy problem to solve. The harder problem to solve is interactivity, which I think is actually where the whole thing breaks down the most. I think that now in modern parlance, when we say something is Euro-like, we are also usually saying it has less interactivity in it. And that has not always been the case because the sort of core tenets of Euro design, El Grande, hello, one of the best Euro games ever, has a ton of I hit you, you hit me, maybe abstracted away. So I think that the biggest problem in the room here is that when you say Euro-y or you say Ameritrashy, you are not also commenting on interactivity, even though it seems like you are. And it is why we need to abolish the system.
My fear, Mark, it's the question of who it serves, right? And my fear sometimes is that if we describe a game as Yuri, the person that it serves is someone that'll be like, oh, I don't want to play that then. Or if we describe a game as Ameritrashy, someone will be like, that's not for me. And I think that is just so decreasingly useful that it worries me as a descriptor sometimes.
Yeah, agreed. I totally get that. I agree with it. But then there's the issue of, hey, that game you're playing, what is it like? Or what is it? Like, without having to go through the rules and you do this, like, people are often wanting a short descriptor of a game. And I agree that Ameritrash and Euro are not accurate and they may cause more harm than good, as you've mentioned. But, like, there is a need for that sort of shorthand.
So, Mark, if you answered these two questions, how much luck is involved and how interactive is it, would that be more or less useful than the entire classification of Euro and Ameritrash games?
That would be very useful. And I'll go one further. I think there is...
You can't one-up me.
There is an interactivity aspect. There's a luck aspect. I'll say that there's also actually maybe two more axes. There's a complexity aspect.
Oh no, we're getting another Mark axis diagram, aren't we?
That's right. We got a 4-axis diagram. And then there's a theme axis. I think those could be the four things. How thematic is a game? How random is a game? How interactive is a game? And how complex is a game? Low complexity, high theme, blah, 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 blah. I think that gets to it.
Complexity doesn't... Yeah. Okay. Like, I understand why complexity is included, but I feel like it's the least important. I suppose if you're just scoring things, like, here's the new system.
Yeah.
That helps a lot.
As a stand-in for weight, for like the BGG weight.
Yeah.
Is this a light game? A light, high complex, high random, high theme. Okay, that's a risk sort of game, maybe. Problem solved.
I love it. We've redefined...
10 years of issues with this, and we just figured it out in less than an hour.
I think it needs some branding work, Mark. I think as soon as you start talking about axes...
Oh, Mark, yeah. You're going to go to Mark for the branding work?
Here we go. Okay, we got to have B's there. So this is the Board Game Barrage. Kellen?
Barometer?
Oh, barometers.
Barometer, yeah.
I love it.
So it's like, okay, let's use Gloomhaven again, right? Because, so Gloomhaven is a diceless combat, but there's no interactivity among players. There's no ability, right? Like, so you would say non-interactive.
Yeah.
I guess it's a cooperative game.
Yeah, but limited interactivity co-op.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No dice. How thematic something is also quite squishy to me.
I agree, actually.
Like,
that's
how much
one of
luck...
the key points I wanted to make, because I feel like thematic games is one of the labels that's been thrown around a lot for, like, a replacement for Ameritrash. I don't think that may have been true at the time, but I think it's less and less true now, both in the context of Eurogames being more and more thematic. And it feels to me also like, in some ways, BGG does this where they have two rankings. They have, like, the strategy games rankings and the thematic games rankings. And it almost feels like they've kind of drawn their own lines on where some of these games should fit. But thematic never felt quite right for me. It's almost just like, I don't know. I don't know what the right replacement term is, because it's almost like experiential. But even that's not quite right.
I mean, when I think of thematic, I think of how...
You think of Ameritrash?
Well,
you dummy.
Yes, and I also think of like how easily replaceable the theme feels like to me. You know what I mean? Like last week, Santa Maria, like I would say that that's a game that is sort of low on theme, that, the theme feels like it could have been something else, should have been something else in Santa Maria. But like, whereas I think there are some games where the theme, like Hostage Negotiator, I think that is a thematic game. I think it's a game where the theme is sort of integral. Of course, now I say that when it's going to be rethemed
to something else.
Yeah, something else. I forget the name of it. But that game, I think, will be heavily tied to the theme as well. Like, it's sort of like tied to the theme rather than some judgment on the theme, I guess.
But to be equally like obnoxious, like some of the most Euro-ass Euro games I can think of, like Mind Clash is very good at this. They make strongly thematic Euro games, you know, like where you couldn't really separate Tricarian or Anachrony from their themes, in my opinion.
Sure. No, I agree.
I still think, and again, I think we're now officially outside the juncture of the episode, which is to say that like no one has proved to me that like thematic is a useful term. Even to say like the game that I think of as most thematic, Dune, you could retheme that easily.
Right.
They just retheme Battlestar Galactica easily. Yeah, there's no issue. Like your Tricarion example, I'll bet you I could retheme that. I have never met a game that can't be rethemed. It's not that it can't
be rethemed. It's that it's kind of the theme feels like it was core to the design in terms of impetus, you know?
So is it mechanically minded or is it thematically minded?
Maybe.
I mean, like, you could retheme Dune, but like Dune feels Dune-y, right? Dune feels like a game that is evocative of a theme. Sure, you could make it about different families of wizards or whatever, but like...
The Pax Pamir family.
But there are games... Just because it can be rethemed doesn't mean that the theming is not strong, I would say.
Yeah, I've never really liked theme.
Just in general.
It's like very tangential to liking the game. I'm a Euro player, baby.
So I think all we have to do, Mark, is get Kellen involved in branding this Axis idea. We take it from there, we unveil it to the world, and we've fixed this. We've fixed a decades-long problem of bad classification.
And then we never say the word Euro again.
Or Ameritrash ever again.
The Barrage Barometer.
Ooh, the Barrage. Okay, thank you, everyone. That was going to do it for this week's episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. One more quick reminder that next week is our 200th episode of the show, and if you want to send us a voicemail to be included on the episode, you can do so at boardgamebarrage.com/voicemail, reflecting on your favorite memory from the last 200 episodes. You can find us on all of our social media at boardgamebarrage.com/Facebook or Twitter, we're at BRDGameBarrage, or you can come talk to us in our Discord, boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's on your mind, kid? Goodbye.
Bye.
So long. Think about the big plastic.
Is that right?
I think it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Kellen.
No, I'm still back in the joke about Mark hosting the 200. I wanted to say, if you hear my voice first, that means Nealon and Kellen's plan to murder Mark has successfully happened. And then just
that's why I'm in
silent.
Vegas. I've caught on to the trap, and I'm
evading prison. What?
Let's get back to it. Mark, kick us off with Hostage Negotiator. Nope, that's not how that word's said.
It is Hostage Negotiator.
Sorry. Mark, kick us off with Hostage Negotiator.
So depending on the threat level, so there's this threat level
Midnight.
What's that?
That's the threat level.
I missed the first part of that.
I said midnight.
Okay, gotcha.